45. So today we are going to start romantic age. Romantic word is very casually used. For example, you'll say your friends talking like, "Oh, so romantic. Oh, such a romantic film." But when it comes to literature, it doesn't mean that same sort of romantic. Romantic means something of love. No, I am not going to send any notes. I have given it to only one, and that becomes your responsibility to get the notes from her. Please send it, inform that you have got the notes in the chat box. That promise thing, please inform it in the chat box that Madam has sent me the notes. Accordingly, you get the mail IDs of your friends. Okay. You have got the notes, no? Setu. So send it to your friends, and I should not be disturbed. That is what that was the agreement between you and between me and you.
Ma'am, actually, I didn't give my email ID. That's why I tabbed it here.
Okay, you get it. You get it. That sort of interaction you should have with your friends. My duty has posted to one, and now your duty is to post it to others. Okay, now let me start. Romantic. So I told you the romantic, the word is used in a very wrong way by people. They say, "Oh, so romantic, such a romantic hero, such a romantic film, such a romantic this thing." Now, don't come with messages. Please now stop the messages. Let me now teach you. Don't start with messages. Yeah. So, but when it comes to literature, the meaning is very different. The meaning is very different. Romantic is no, it is a movement. Romanticism was a movement, and it is an artistic and intellectual movement that originated in Europe, and toward the end of the 18th century, and it was the period is like from 1800 to 1850. Sorry, 1798 to 1832. That was the period of romantic age. So, what was this romanticism, romantic movement? What was it? It was a reaction against the Enlightenment, against the 18th century rationalism and the physical materialism. Because 18th century, I told you, it was an age of reason, it was an age of prose, and it was an age of analysis. So people got fed up with all that. So they wanted to have a change. After every age, there is some change. So this also needed a change. So literature that time became very objective because it was more about society, what is happening in the society, and it was very cynical, it was very satirical. That was the age of the 18th century. But with this romantic age, it was a reaction against all this, against this enlightenment, so-called enlightenment, and they wanted to have a change. And more important was that imagination. Purba, what happened? What has happened to Purba? Why have you raised your hand? So, this was a movement against this age of enlightenment, against the age of reason, against intellectualism. So, what became important was not intellect, but imagination. Imagination, passion, love, those are the feelings of mankind, of human beings, that were given importance to in this age. So what were the causes of why this happened? That time, the French Revolution, the American War of Independence in 1776, French Revolution in 1789, this took place. And when you talk of French Revolution, what were the slogans? Fraternity, equality, and liberty. That means the democratic ideals were appreciated. So there's no sort of colonialism, there's no sort of, hegemony or controlling people, but it was more of fraternity, more of liberty, more of equality. These were the slogans. And also this American War of Independence that they fought, also they wanted freedom. So the spirit of freedom was the champion, the spirit of freedom through the American War of Independence in 1776. So the French Revolution caused a democratization of the literature in language, theme. So it was a total democratization. It was a total, freedom. The self was made free. They could think, they could imagine. There was no restriction, there was no form, there was no formality, how to write, what to write. That happened in the previous age. And as a result, due to all these movements, center of attraction, center of reflection was mankind, was human being, the individual self, that was given very important, the importance in this age. The self of the poet, the self of the person, the self, what he thinks, what he imagines. So it is romantic age. What is the subject today? It is romantic age. Try to come in time, because I cannot go on repeating, no?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the features of the romantic age, as you see, is that emotion was given a lot of importance, emotion, passion. And it was a going back to the past. When we go back to the past, what is the sentiment attached to you? Can you name that sentiment?
Nostalgia.
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 Nostalgia. So nostalgia is like going back to the past, remembering the past, remembering the incidents of the past. It comes like a dream sequence to you when you do all this. And then nature was worshipped. People and the poets, the writers became conscious of not about only the society, what is happening in the society, but they went back to nature, because nature gave that relief, nature gave that solace to them, nature gave that comfort to them. So they love to be in the lap of nature. And they wanted to celebrate the individual self, because that was very important in the romantic age. So the source of poetry was not society, but the poet himself. Whatever the poet thought, whatever the poet saw, whatever the poet imagined was reflected in the writings of or in the creation of the poet. For example, the definition of poetry also changed in this time. Wordsworth says, what was Wordsworth? The spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. So it is a spontaneous, something which you don't think. That was his definition of poetry. And what was definition of poetry according to Keats? Keats says poetry should come as naturally as the leaves of a tree, as the leaves appear on the tree. Similarly, poetry also should come naturally to oneself. So that was how they treated poetry in this age. So romanticism, as it is clear by its name, I told you that the predominant element of the romanticism was imagination and emotion. Imagination and emotion. And they were the romantics. They went against They were not the supporters, but they went against the neoclassical spirit of the previous century, where they were more of a criticism of the society. The thing was very cynical and very objective also. But here, they didn't believe in all that. They wanted that what is more important is how to relax in nature, how to get the comfort in nature, how to imagine. All these things became important. So imagination, emotion, and freedom are the focal points of romanticism. So if you say who are the early romantic poets, because you cannot, there are certain important poets which we will discuss, but the early romantic poets, they were, one was Thompson, James Thompson, and he had written a poem called The Seasons, where he talks about nature, about the fearful aspects of nature, the flood, the storms. That is how what he wrote. And then another poet was there Joseph Warton. He wrote about again nature, the idyllic innocence of the new world. And the next poet was, these are the minor poets I can say. What William Collins. William Collins was another poet who wrote of landscape. He described the landscape, and he wrote an ode on superstitions. Then there was Thomas Gray, who wrote elegy on a country churchyard. That was the elegy. Then there was William Cowper, who again he was wrote about nature, very contemplated about nature, and he says that it is better to contemplate about nature than to read the books. That is what he said. No, there's no point reading books, but to contemplate, one to see nature. And then it was Robert Burns who eulogized love, and his famous poem. He was a Scottish poet, and his poet is infused with folklore. And his famous line is, "My love is like a red, red rose." That was the poem. My love is like a red, red rose. So these were the minor poets, early poets, romantic poets, and all of them, you find all of them celebrating nature, all of them reflecting nature, all of them writing something about their own imagination, about the comfort, about the pleasure they get from nature. That is the main idea. So the generally will find the theme is love, youth, birth, and death. These are, as the cycle of nature changes, you will find these themes, all these themes in the early poets you can find. And the simple diction was used. They are not very grandiloquent language of Milton, full of classical allusions, full of mythological references. No, the language was the language of the common people. It was very simple. They could understand the language. And so that was, and they wrote a variety of poems, variety of poems. One was an elegy, one was ode, the other was lyric. You know what is called elegy? Anyone who can tell me what is an elegy? Yes.
The morning song
Ma'am,
for
it's a
somebody's death.
morning writing for
Somebody
a
death.
dead person.
Yeah,
It's
someone
a
who,
poem written for somebody who has passed away.
it's a sad song. Yeah, it's a sad something which has got a sad tone, and it is a one about the loss, who speaks about the loss of a friend or someone very intimate to you, and then that is a elegy written on that. So that was the form of the elegy. And ode again, that was again a typical way of writing. There are different types of Petrarchan ode, Horatian ode. So there are different types, and it is one theme. In ode, you'll find one long sort of lyric. It is continuous, and it is written in different sorts of stanzas, and that is the ode, and it is usually addressed to someone. That is the ode. And then you can find this what you can say, this lyric again. I told you it's on, all are written in blank verse. They didn't believe in any form, because they believe in liberty of diction, liberty of thought, liberty of expression. So the romantics believed in all that, so they didn't follow any formal way of writing. They were not, they're totally informal poets. And then the first generation will come to the first generation of romantic poets. And there we are going to read the three important poets which I'm going to discuss is William Blake. One is William Blake, and the other one is William Wordsworth, and the third is Samuel T. Coleridge. These are, you can say, the giants of romantic age. They're the giants. And the later poets, you can say it is Keats. Keats was very important. Keats. So first we can concentrate on William Blake. We'll come to that because that is there in your course.
Ma'am, can I ask a question? Kavita here.
Yes, tell me.
Ma'am, as we were talking about elegy, I just wanted to know the difference between monody and elegy. Because monody, that Lycidas poem is called as monody, right? Monody.
Monody is something which is, about one particular person. Again, reminiscing, even mourning about one particular person. The form is little different, but elegy is generally it's not about. It's like a narrative. Elegy is in the form of a narrative, big narrative, and it is again a mourning poem of mourning. Both are mourning poems, but there's a little difference, maybe little difference is there of monody and elegy. But elegy, it in some age elegy is very popular, in some age monody is very popular, but in romantic age you'll find mostly the elegies were written.
Okay, ma'am, thank you.
So should we go to first William? I think we can first concentrate on this Wordsworth. Let us first concentrate on Wordsworth because yes, Wordsworth, he was the pioneer, you can say, and he was a great friend of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Both of them, they published the lyrical ballads also. So he was famous for writing the preface to lyrical ballads, where he discusses the different aspects of poetry in that preface. And he has written a number of short poems and also long poem. The long poem which you have is the Prelude, and he has also written a number of short poems like Tintern Abbey, Michael, Lucy poems, Ode on Imitations of Immortality. These are the short poems he had written. and the long poem was, you have the Prelude. So what is the main theme in Wordsworth's poetry? You find Wordsworth believed in a theory called theory of pantheism. Pantheism, Pantheism. That means God in nature. God in nature. That is what he believed. So he says nature provides the good influence on human mind. All manifestations of the nature, like mountains to lakes to flower to anything, they what happens, it elevate the thoughts. It elevates our thoughts, and we become a loftier. We become through nature we become as if nature is a preacher to us, and nature has such a healing effect on human beings that we become transcendental. We transcend from the gross level of our existence, and we become sublime characters. That is the effect of nature on us. So he says, Wordsworth says, that if man maintains a good relation with nature, first is the physical nature, which he can see around him, and it goes beyond, because according to Wordsworth, there is a spirit in nature. Nature is just not physical; it has got a spirit. It has got its own palpitations. It has got its own rhythm. It has got its own spirit. So nature is something where there is a presence. Presence of what? Presence of the divine. Presence of the ultimate. Presence of God. That is what he believes in nature has. So nature is just not limited to just seeing a mountain or just seeing a flower or just seeing a valley. No, it goes much beyond, and it has a great impact. It has got a spiritual impact on mankind. So, what is the impact of man on mankind? Man becomes transformed through nature. Man becomes transformed through nature, and he starts loving human beings around him. He loves, because loving nature, the element of love becomes so predominant that he becomes a loving soul to all. So that is the healing power of nature according to Wordsworth. So he says that in one of the poems he says, the world is too much with us. The world is too much with us. So that is the reason he says it's better that we go back to nature and enjoy the the beauty of nature, the comfort of nature. So nature is a friend, philosopher, and guide to Wordsworth. So the empathy, the feeling of empathy, the feeling of nobility of spirit, that which is usually corrupted, staying in a society by the social conventions, that somehow nature, through nature, gets that effect is gone. And when you spend a lot of time with nature, in nature, around nature, then there, that meanness, that sort of negative thing which we have in us, that gets somehow dissipated, and man becomes a nobler soul through the healing power of nature. So he defined poetry. Poetry, he says, it is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotion which is recollected in tranquility. These two things are important. One is spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and recollected in tranquility. So in all of Wordsworth's poems, you'll find he never writes about the present thing. For example, if you go to Daffodils, he says, what is the first line of the Daffodils?
I wander lonely as a cloud.
Often on my couch I lie, in vacant and in pensive mood, the flash upon my inward eye, which is a bliss of solitude. That means the poet recollects. Whatever he has seen, he is recollecting that. Same thing in Solitary Reaper. He sees a girl, a beautiful lass, beautiful girl, and she's harvesting. She's cutting the grass with the sickle, and he sees that girl, and he writes about that girl. The music he hears from her, that goes on ringing in his ears even afterwards. So he goes and recollects that. That is always done in tranquility in the case of Wordsworth. That was his style of writing. So he says poetry should be spontaneous. It should be spontaneous. So there should be no artificiality in poetry. It has to come from within your own self. So that was the idea of Wordsworth. And this Daffodils, don't have to explain that poem where he talks about he has seen a host of daffodils, and he was in the riverside. He sees those daffodils, and it was bright yellow, beautiful, and that sort of beauty, he comes, and when he is in a pensive mood, the word pensive is a very romantic word. Pensive means not very sad, but when you are to yourself, when you are left to yourself, totally left to yourself, and you're talking to your own self, there's no one around you. Not exactly melancholic. Melancholic is a little different, but pensive is something, where you are haunted where you are recollecting the past, you are alone, you are reflecting. That is the mood of pensiveness. It's not exactly sad. So he remembers how the daffodils were dancing, swaying from one side to another. And he remembers that. And when he's alone and is alone, left to himself, is relaxing, lost his own thoughts. So that is the reflective mood he remembers. Just a minute. Just I'm switching off the video for 1 minute. Just a minute. Yeah. Now we come to the long poem which you have is the prelude. So this is an autobiographical poem in 14 books. 14 books. And it's a long poem of 7,883 lines in blank verse. 7,883 lines in blank verse. It's an epical poem, very long. And he kept on writing this poem throughout his entire life, writing, rewriting, and revising, but never published in his lifetime. He never published. Just a minute. I've got a phone call. अब हम क्लास नो चिटी so he never published this poem, and that is a great landmark of, you can say, the landmark poem of the prelude. And he had given a subtitle also to the poem, and that the subtitle was The Growth of a Poet's Mind. Growth of a Poet's Mind. The poem has an epical form, very lofty style, serious, and it is episodic. It is written in different books. It is first 2 books of this prelude. Wordsworth never wanted that to publish it in his lifetime, to make it a magnum opus, that a great seminal work. He never intended that also. So he wrote as an introduction to a poem, the introduction to the great philosophical poem. He thought he can write an introduction, but the introduction became so long that it transformed itself into a poem. So he wanted to give an introduction to the poem The Recluse. It's a great philosophical poem which was inspired by Coleridge, and he wrote of writing, but he never completed. But he completed that prelude he completed, which he thought that he can give as an introduction to this poem. But this he continued, and this became a seminal work of Wordsworth. So he didn't realize that he has written such a great work, and that he never realized in his own life. In his entire lifetime, he never published it. But it was only after his death in 1850 that the poems he was written in he wrote so many times, went on revising the prelude, and that was published after his death. So the first two books, if you tell what is this analysis of prelude, if you go to that, we'll find it essentially it is written in a blank verse, and it is about Wordsworth's actual experience. He was born in a Lake District in England, and Lake District is very famous for its pastoral beauty. Anyone who has visited London? Any one of you?
Yes, I visited, but only for one day.
Oh, that is sad actually.
Yeah, I couldn't utilize it. Yes,
Students of literature, if they visit London,
yes,
one should go to the Stratford upon Avon where the Shakespeare was born,
yes,
and
yes,
especially to the Lake District
yes,
where all these romantic poets, that is the place for all these romantic poets.
yes.
So it is a place full of landscape, beautiful pastures, pastoral beauty, and Wordsworth spent his childhood, much of his childhood, in this place, Lake District. So but after some time, Wordsworth lost his parents. That was when he became the sudden loss, made him very nostalgic. And he talked about time, which is very temporary.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes?
Ma'am, which page are you telling now?
What was your question?
Which page are you telling now?
Prelude.
Okay, ma'am.
So he talks about his childhood. So there are different books of this prelude. The book first begins in past present tense, where the speaker or the poet from the city is writing, but he goes back. As an adult, he writes about his childhood. And he looks at childhood from a distance, and he continues to narrate in the past tense. The child speaker here explores nature and the importance of nature. He establishes a beautiful relationship of his childhood with nature and poetry. So these are the three links of Wordsworth: childhood, nature, and poetry. So childhood and natural world are deeply linked. And the childhood which he describes it's a childhood of innocence, rusticity, whether it is very rustic, about a rural world he talks about. And at the same time, he talks about nature, which had also a great impact when he became a youth, when he became young. So his sensitivity to the natural world, his sensitivity to nature is beautifully reflected in this poem. And he suggests that it is his temperament, it is poetic temperament to be sensitive to nature, because he feels there is a presence in nature. Something is there in his nature which tries to educate him, which tries to make him a better human being. So nature here is not a passive thing, is not very passive, but it is not just an object for him, but it is something which is linked with his own consciousness, which is attached, which has got a deep connection with his consciousness. And also, it is just not the physical nature, but as the spirit is there in the nature, as something great, a greater spirit is there in the nature, he thinks that there is presence of God in nature, because it has got a healing power, it has got an educative power. So that is the reason he says, so nature is also divine. So nature is physical, nature is divine. So the different aspects of nature he talks about. For example, there is a particular stanza in the poem where the poet is rowing a boat all alone in a lake, and the lake is surrounded by mountains. The lake is surrounded by the mountains, the cliffs. Suddenly, the poet becomes very scared. He feels as if someone is following him. because he feels the presence of nature. That is because he's a small child, so he feels as if someone is following him, and he gets very scared. So the first two books of the prelude describe the speaker's attachment, affinity with the natural world, with the beauty of the, especially of the Lake District in the north of England, where the nature is very benevolent but powerful. Nature is benevolent but powerful, and it is a powerful force. It is a powerful force, but it is very benign. It is loving. It is not very, doesn't scare you. It is not very terrifying, but it has got a very healing aspect. So he believes in the pantheistic idea that God and nature are inseparable. God is in nature, nature is in God. So both are inseparable. And he also argues that nature remains an important element of his work throughout his entire lifetime, and also his worldview is about nature. So that is the romantic idea of nature he had, and it tried to shape him. The nature tried to shape the poet, and the poet will find towards the book third. In the book third, you find the nature, the speaker, he leaves home to attend Cambridge. There, he separated from the rustic surrounding, from the sylvan surrounding of the pastoral world. Then there he finds a atmosphere of pretension. He doesn't find that it is an authentic world. He finds it is hypocritical. He finds everything is very artificial here in the city. So that is the reason he always misses. He always, deprived. He's always deprived, and he goes back. Whenever he feels sad, he goes back to nature, goes back to the past, and remembers the beautiful moments of his life. So he remembers the landscape of his youth through his distant eyes. So these aspects, the virtues of mankind, the virtues he has, whatever virtue, man has virtues, that is shaped, he says, that is shaped through the benign influence of nature, because nature is something which heals you, which makes you a better human being. So this is about Wordsworth, because I cannot go into many details because we have to touch so many poets. Next poem which we have to go is the poet William Blake. He is another great poet, William Blake. He had also written a number of poems. I think you are also very familiar with those poems, William Blake. Let me touch those poems. So William Blake, he was another great poet. One was William Wordsworth, next is William Blake. He had written two famous series of poems. One was called Song of Innocence. The other was called The Song of Experience. Song of Innocence and The Song of Experience. So, but he is little different from Wordsworth. Here he also talks about the innocence, about God, but from a different viewpoint. He writes that, and most of the poems of Blake is very, very symbolic. He doesn't talk directly, because Wordsworth was a poet. He talks about the common language of the people. You could understand him. There is no difficulty in understanding Wordsworth. But when it comes to Blake, he is the symbolic poet. He talks about the romantic revolt. And he was little also at the same time, he was very much inspired by the French Revolution. So he was inspired the spirit of liberty. So he wanted to have the freedom. He talked of freedom, how people should not be in chains, people should not be confined. So he talked of freedom, even the sexual freedom. He talks of that women should also have the freedom to enjoy sex, and one should be in freedom from the confine. The children should not be confined, made chimney sweepers, made child labor. All these things should not be there. They should also have the freedom. So he was very much inspired by this industrial revolution, and what happened, the after effect of the industrial revolution, the negative effect, that also affected the poet greatly. So you can find a lot of images, lot of symbols, and you can say that he's also a revolutionary poet, because he talked about freedom, which should be, he said that freedom should be granted to man. Even the women should be granted the freedom. So again, the child is a very important figure in his poems, and imagination is also there, and he attacks social injustice that was in London during that time, because due to industrial revolution, people were exploited. There are two types of classes, the have and the have nots, the capitalists and the proletariat. So there were a lot of exploitation in the society. That was made the poet little very rebellious, and he wanted that if it is freedom, one should get the freedom in life. One should not be in chains. One should not be, like he could hear the chimney sweepers cry at night. He could hear the soldiers cry. So, and you can find he talks about a prostitute, a harlot, how she's cursing people because of her life. All this, he says that these are man-made creations. This is not nature. This is man-made creations. So he also talks about man as shepherd. He also, the elements of pastoralism is also found in his poems. So he is a poet, he is a mystic, and he's also a visionary. Three things are there. So let me go to his poems first. You must have read this poem. Have you read this poem? Let me read that poem.
Which poem, ma'am?
I'm reading. Just a minute. From the text I'm reading. Just give me 1 minute. The Lamb.
Yes, ma'am.
And let me read out this poem. It's a small poem I can read. Little lamb, who made thee? He asked. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Do you know who made you? Gave thee life and bade thee feed, gave you life and also fed you. By the stream and over the mead, gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly, bright.
Hey, ma'am, I have a doubt, ma'am.
No, all these doubts will be clear at the end of the. Don't distract me already. I told
Okay,
you.
ma'am.
Please don't distract me.
Okay.
Give thee such tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell you, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name. Because Jesus is also associated with lamb. When Jesus was born, you'll find the picture of a lamb, right? So he is called, means he refers to God. He is called by thy name. That means lamb. For he calls himself a lamb. He is meek, he is mild. He became a little child. I a child, and thou a lamb. I a child, and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee, God bless thee. So he talks about the mystery of creation. He talks about innocence. And he talks about lamb. He asks a number of questions to the child, rhetorical questions. And the first section of the poem, first stanza of 10 lines, you'll find it reflects the childlike quality of innocence. The lamb, gentle nature, woolly tender, soft, delight, bright, rejoice. This is, and he brings a parallel, he makes a comparison between the child and the lamb. The child also refers to Jesus Christ. So without naming Christ, the speaker says, the maker, that means the Christ. He also is a child. He is also a lamb. So he shares the same qualities as you have, the meekness, the softness, the innocence, that also a child has. And the divinity, the child has an element of divinity as the lamb has. So the diction of the poem you find is very simple, but it is also very symbolic. It talks about the innocence of the child. So he addresses the lamb. And the lamb, according to, he says, who made the lamb? He asks this question. And then he tells the lamb the answer also. The creator has the same name, which has the same name as the lamb has created you. And he also calls himself lamb. So the creator is gentle and kind. And he is also a child. So, and the speaker is the child. Both the speaker and the lamb share the name of the creator. So he says, I also, the speaker, the one who says, he also has the same innocence as the lamb. So the lamb, it is a religious poem, and it marvels at the God's creation. And in this poem, he wonders how a lamb comes to existence from God. God has only created the gentle figure of the lamb. So he says the lamb is just not made by God, but it is an expression of God. It is an expression of God. So through the example of the lamb, the speaker suggests that the entire world is an expression of God. It is an expression of God. So the poem, though the poem is addressed to the lamb cannot respond to the poem. So it is the question of who made it? Who made it? And the speaker is sure that is the Christian God. It is the Christian God who has got the power and the might to create a fragile, a very small, a very tender, a very innocent being like a lamb. So this makes the speaker very happy and very joyful. So that God is the maker, he says. And thus says that God's creation is a blessed creation. So, and he expresses, he praises, and is thankful for the existence of God in the poem. So that is the main meaning of the poem, Lamb. There is another poem I'll read out. The Chimney Sweeper. This poem you must have read also, The Chimney Sweeper. Let me read this poem also. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me, while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, weep, weep. So when he lost his mother, the father sold him, and he could scarcely cry, could hardly weep also. And then he becomes a chimney sweeper, because in London you'll find in that time they had chimneys, and it is being a cold country, the chimney was very full of soot, SOOT. That means what you can say, that the firewood when it burns, that sort of ash, you can say, that gets settled in the chimney. The small children, they can enter the chimney, they can go through the chimney and clean the chimney, because it is like a big pipe, right? So the ash is the carbon, so that is called the soot, SOOT, soot. So the small children were employed for that job, and they used to go into the chimney and used to clean that. As a result, the whole shirt, whatever they wore, that was becoming very black, and it was also very suffocating. It's like a very terrible thing to a small child. So, in chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There is little Tom who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved. So I said, Hush, Tom, never mind. For when your head is bare, you know that the suit cannot spoil your white hair. So they were shaved. That the hair the hair was shaved, because they have to go inside the chimney. So he tells his friend that don't worry, your hair is shaved, because or else it will spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was sleeping, he had such a sight. Thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. So the children were looking like coffins of black. They're all black in color. And by came an angel who had a bright key, opened the coffins, and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run, washed in a river and shined in the sun. So they all ran away, the naked and the white, their bags left behind. Our children, how they dance and how they jump into the rivers, they become naked and they leave the bags and they jump into the rivers. That's a very common sight in villages. He opened the coffin, set them all free, and they were leaping, laughing, washing in the rivers, shining in the sun. Then naked and white, all the bags left behind. They rise upon the clouds, sporting in the wind. And the angel told Tom, if he did be a good boy, he did have God for his father and never want joy. So don't worry, you have your father as God. That is what the angel tells Tom. And so Tom awoke, because he's dreaming. He rose in the dark, got with the bags, brushes to work. The morning was cold. Tom was happy and warm. So, if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. That is the last line of the poem. So, if they all do the duty, they need not be fearful. So, it is again a poem of William Blake, which was published in 1789, and it is from the Song of Innocence. Though it is told from the perspective of a young chimney sweep, a boy who has been sold into labor by his father, and the sweep meets a new recruit, and he's in a gang, Tom Dacre, who also comes very terrified. Tom is very terrified when he comes. So the speaker tries to reassure Tom. Then Tom dreams of an angel who sets the chimney sweeps free, allowing them to play, dance, take bath, all these things happening. So it is a bleak poem, The Chimney Sweeper. It is a bleak poem. And and that was a thing prevailing in 1700 in London, where these people were, doing dangerous work of cleaning the chimneys, going into the chimney and doing all sorts of things, of labor, because they are very poor. And that was the time of industrial revolution. So this poet doesn't make efforts to romanticize. He talks about the reality, what had happened that time. He talks about the poor. He talks about the tough life of the chimney sweepers, and also talks about the exploitation of the small boys. So the hardship has been beautifully, but at the same time, he also says that though they have lost their mother, though the father has sold, though they are having a difficult life, still they are happy. They are happy, and they want to do that work, and they dream of, dancing naked, going and taking bath in the river. They're happy. So that is, they enjoy the freedom which is denied to them, enjoy the joy, the nature which has been denied in real life to them. So it is like a salvation for the children from this life of hardship. And they think that one day, they hope that no matter what the suffering is, we have to do our duty, because God is his father. So we have to do the duty. So that is the meaning of the chimney sweeper. That is the analysis of the chimney sweeper. That is from the Song of Innocence. Then he had also written the Song of Experience, where there's also another famous poem of William Blake, where he says, the tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deep or sky burnt the fire of thine eyes? What wings he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? What shoulder, what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? Thy heart began to beat. What dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil? All in questions, asks. When the stars threw down the spears, watered heaven with the tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? The one who created the lamb. Can God create the same one who created lamb? Can he create a tiger? So dreadful, an animal like you. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye has framed the fearful symmetry? So this poem is full of questions, and it is a beautiful contrast. And it's a series of questions about the nature of God, about creation, and about the lamb, about the fearsome tiger. The tiger here becomes a symbol. The tiger here becomes a symbol of, again, a God's creation, and also a marvel of God, you can say. It's not that everything is bad about the tiger. Tiger looks very majestic. His eyes shine like fire. It's flashing eyes. In the dark night, you find the eyes flashing. So this is something which is like an immortal being, he has created. It's a fearsome beauty. It's a beauty, but fearsome beauty, dreadful beauty. So the speaker wonders in which depth or sky the tiger's eyes were made. Who made those tiger's eyes? Who made the tiger, this which he runs with such a great speed, like as if he has got wings? And his hand, so dreadful, he has got claws, so dreadful. So what skill, what effort God must have undergone to create this marvel, the tiger, with so strong, with such a muscular body. But the tiger's heart also beats. The tiger's heart also beats. So he talks about the creator of the tiger, and he says the tiger's brain must have been, created in a forge, by putting some fire or something in a forge, because there's no tenderness in his heart. So everything is terrifying about the tiger. So he wonders, he addresses the tiger, and he expresses awe and marvel of God's creation. How God can create two different things, one a sheep, one a tiger, one very innocent, very timid, the other so fearsome, so dreadful. So the tiger, the spelling is Tyger. So he says, is the same creature created by the same God who could create this world so gentle, so joyful at the same time? How can God create such a fearsome animal? So through the example of the tiger, the poem examines the existence of evil in the world, asking questions. If God created everything, God is all powerful. So everything, the evil and the good, the timid and the powerful, all is created by God, because that is how he brings symmetry. He has made a symmetry of this world, because there has to be some harmony. It is not only about a lamb or something, but this world is made of opposites. So he has to also make something which is very fearful. It is supposed to behave in a particular way, but the lamb is also behaving in a particular way. So the tiger is associated with fire. Tiger, burning bright. It is associated with fire, because when you see a tiger at night, you find the eyes of as if it's burning. So he tries to understand how God, who has made this vulnerable lamb, how could he choose to make such a dreadful animal? He fails to understand. He fails to understand the creation of God. But he says, perhaps this is the majesty of God's work. Perhaps because opposites, this world is made of opposites. So the tiger and the lamb, they are the opposites. So innocence and experience, they are also the opposites. Childhood and adulthood, that is opposite. So this is the pattern of the world that has been created by God. So it is God's divinity. So this is the poem, The Tiger. So I have talked about Song of Innocence and Song of Experience. I read out 2 poems from there and read out 1 poem from here. So you have a fair idea of William Blake. And London is also another poem. Let me just, I'll not read the poem, but just tell you that the poem also, the poem here takes a walk, London, but he's pained, he's feeling sad, oppressive, because the city has become a city of not of great beauty, because due to the industrial revolution, it is a people where you'll find the cries of men, the soldiers, the children. Everyone is suffering also in this world, and due to the industrial revolution. So the poet takes a walk along the city of London and narrates his experience, what he sees in the city of London. So it is about the city of London. He focuses on that particular city of London, nothing to do with nature, but how everything is, there is a lot of suffering in London. That is what he says. He says that it is a dangerous and dirty city, and it is also where, due to the industrial revolution, you can say that urban environment has become very, very oppressive, denying people the freedom to live happy and joyful lives. That is the main central idea of the poem. And the people are full of woe, WOE, means suffering. And even the river Thames It doesn't look very, very beautiful. It is as if, lot of filth is there in the city. So it is not a symbol of freedom as the river goes. He says everywhere there is pain, and in every voice you find there is a painful thing, newborn babies. And he says all these things that, like handcuff, it is man-made, mind-forged manacles. He says manacles mean that is which is the restraint or the handcuff created by men. They have created only this. And so that is the root cause of misery, London's misery. And the society that could be joyful, that could be free, that could be love, full of love, but that society is now full of people's fear, and it is an oppressive environment. So he goes on elaborating that, and the poem views modern London city, the industrial city. And but this says, at the same time, he says that there's changes, there have been changes, but they are not for the better. And he gives a criticism of London, and that is what we find in nowadays also, in cities also we find the same thing happening to us also. What we found in London, the same thing happening to us all around us nowadays also. So he gave a beautiful picture of London city, how the city becomes very oppressive, how the nature is also lost in that city, and it is full of cries, the baby crying, the harlot crying, the soldier crying. Everyone is in a state of mourning, and due to all this, and it's all due to the effect of industrialization, you can say. So that is with William Blake. And next is, you can say, if you come, then we can go to the Coleridge. Coleridge, I told you, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, that was his name. Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And he was a great friend of William Wordsworth. As Wordsworth believed in nature, Coleridge had his own theory. He believed in imagination and fancy. He says that these are the two terms on which poetry rests, especially imagination. He says imagination can transform everything. It has got a great power, imagination. So his theory was willing suspension of disbelief. I'll give you an example. For example, when you go to see a movie, okay, when you are outside the movie hall, you know that you are going to see a movie, and what you see is not really happening with you or in front of you. It is just a movie. But when you are inside the hall, you willingly suspend your disbelief. You had a disbelief that I am going to see something which is totally imagination or something, which is not very real. I'm going to see a movie. But when you go there, you become a part of that. You get organically related to that. And that becomes real for you for that time. You become a part of it. That means you willingly suspend. You know very well, but you willingly suspend your disbelief. And you believe whatever you see. Doesn't it happen with you? Could you understand what I said?
Ma'am, will you please repeat the question?
Yes?
Will you please repeat the question?
I said, I'm just giving you an example, that when you go to see a movie, okay,
Okay.
you find the hero dying, hero is having a life of misery, When you are outside the movie, oh, I will go to see that movie. Well, this hero is suffered this. You look at it objectively. But when you are inside the hall, that 3 hours, you willingly suspend your disbelief.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay?
Okay.
And you become a part of it. Instead, you start crying, you start having fight with your friend. Oh no, he should not have suffered like this. He should have got the heroin. He should have this, then that done. Then after you come out, again you distance yourself, thinking, oh, that happened to that hero. But during that time, due to the play of imagination, you become organically related to that. Yes, please mute yourself.
Okay, ma'am. Sorry.
Did you understand what I said? Willing suspension of disbelief.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes.
For example, there is a long poem, Rhyme of Ancient Mariner. There, in that poem, Coleridge tells about the story told by the ancient mariner. Mariner is one who goes in a ship, and he's very old. He's an old man. He has gone to a wedding. He sees number of guests, and he stops the wedding guest and says, listen to my story. Listen to my story. People are, in a hurry to go, but as he starts the story, it becomes so real, so gripping, that all the people who had come for the marriage feast, they listened to him dumbfounded. He talks about a ship. Where they are going in the ship, and there he talks about an albatross. Albatross is a Christian bird, very holy bird, a big bird. So that albatross, one of the men in the ship kills the albatross. So as the Christian bird is killed, what all suffering they went through. The ship is stuck in the midst of an ocean. It doesn't move. It is stagnant. And he says, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. Water everywhere and not a drop to drink. So that they try their best to move the ship, but the ship is stuck because it has undergone a curse. So I'm telling, when he tells the story, all these people who had come, they're so mesmerized by the tale, listening to the tale, that they think that it has happened with them only. Become one of the characters in the story. There are a number of characters in the story. So they also become one of the characters. So that is the power of imagination, which Coleridge says. It can transform you. You become one of them. That is the power. As I give you an example of going to see a movie and you become a part of that movie. You start sympathizing with the one who is suffering. Why? You know that it is a movie. You should not do that. But why you do that? You know that you have spent money going to see a movie. When you are outside the hall, after you come back from the hall, you realize, oh, it's a movie. But when it is happening in front of you, why you emotionally attach yourself? Because of the imagination. Because that is the power of imagination. Whoever has done it, has thought about it, he tries to bring you close to that and you become a part of it. So one of the poems he wrote was Dejection. Let me tell you, this Coleridge was an opium taker. He used to take a lot of opium. And that is also one of the reasons why he died, overdose of opium. So in this dejection, he talks about the emptiness he feels being separated from the women he loved. He sees the new moon holding the old moon in her lap. He wishes for a storm to occur because he is totally looking, is so dull, is totally lost, is dejected. So he says that if a storm will occur, perhaps my emotion will be stirred and I will be relieved of this dull pain of dejection. That was an ode he had written. And then he wrote a famous poem, which you have in your syllabus, that is Kubla Khan. This poem he wrote in a semi-conscious state. Can you imagine? He was dreaming and he wrote this poem. In a semi-conscious state, he wrote, and the whole poem is an atmosphere of dream sequence. And it is a vision. He sees, as we see a vision in a dream, he sees a vision. Actually, he had read a book, a travel book, where at Xanadu, there's actually a place where Kubla Khan had built a beautiful palace. So he dreams of that palace. And this poem has 200 lines. And it is a dream poem. But what happens, as he was dreaming, dream sequence, he was, seeing that dream, and after that, he just started composing and he was writing it. There was a knock. Someone knocked on the door. He got up, opened the door, but the dream sequence was lost for him. The dream sequence which continued was lost. That is the reason the poem remained a fragment. He could not complete that poem. So it is Kubla Khan was the grandson of Chengiz Khan and great ruler of Central Asia, and he had built that palace which Coleridge dreams. I will give you the notes of this. So this is an unfinished poem, you can say a fragment, and it talks about a beautiful city, mythical city known as Xanadu, and where the Kubla Khan is a powerful ruler, and there is a pleasure dome there, which comprises of caves of ice. That pleasure dome has ice, and it was the summer capital of Kubla Khan, the Mongol ruler. And there is also a river, Alf. He talks about the river. He talks about the walls, towers built around the dome, 10 square miles. And in the garden, he saw that streams, meandering streams, trees bearing sweet smelling flowers. And in this opulence, he finds a woman crying for her lover. So that is another dream sequence he sees. And then he sees a fountain, the river which goes into the ocean, makes all sorts of noise. And then he can hear the ancient voices of the people forecasting a war. And then you can find the sunny, when the shadow of the pleasure dome floating on the water. It is just swaying from one side to another. That is the description he gives of this So it's a beautiful dream sequence he gives. And just a minute, I'll just go into detail. Let me do that. So the language he uses in this poem is a language of haunting melody. It has no story, no moral, no allegory, just a description he gives, and a shadowy vision and haunting music, pure romance of imagination. And he talks about it's a dream, as I told you, it's a vision, and it describes that it's the kingdom of Kublai Khan, Xanadu, a mythical city. Alpha is the sacred river that goes through that Xanadu, and there are caverns, caves, and the sea is sunless. It is dark sea, and there are gardens. The gardens has flowers, and the place is visited by fairies and demons. So as the river reaches the caverns, the caves, you can say, it goes noisily, gets merged into the ocean with a great sound. And in that sound, in that particular place, he can hear the voices of the ancestors. They are approaching a war, danger. And in the second half of the poem, he describes the shadow of the Kublai Khan, which is floating on the waves. And at times it is bright, at times it is shadowy. Then he talks about a maid, an African maid, an Abyssinian maid, who is playing a dulcimer. And that is it creates the world charm. And then he says the people also, some people of the past, they're all going. So this all these pictures you'll find, he like dream sequence, is going in front of him, and it is a world of wonder and romance. So as you read the poem, you feel as if you are in some other world. That is the power of imagination he had, that he could mesmerize you. You cannot read that poem with a distancing effect. You have to be a part of that poem. You become a part of that, and when you read the poem, understand it, you enjoy it. Because this poem, I told you, it is like a dream. And actually one morning, Coleridge had fallen asleep in his chair after taking a heavy dose of opium, and he was reading about Kublai Khan, a travelogue, and then he fell asleep. And in his dream, he composes this poem. About 300 lines he had written. And then after he just awakens, he starts writing those lines. But when he had just written 50 lines, someone interrupts him. A man comes on business and knocks the door, and he is detained by him for 1 hour. But by the time he comes to the room, that the dream sequence has gone. He's not able to recollect what he had seen. So the poem remains unfinished. The poem remains like a fragment. So that is the Kublai Khan. It's a very big, important question for you. Wordsworth and Coleridge and Blake, 3 great poets I have taught you today. I think today here I can stop, because I have gone 7:35. Now we can have some question answer session. If you have, you can answer. And in the next class, I will teach about Shelley and Keats, and also the Victorian poets. So I have three classes, I think. 3 more classes I have. So the Victorian poets and 2 more poets are there. And Victorian poets, and then the modern poets, where 2 important poets, Eliot and Yeats. These are the 2 important poets which I'm going to touch. If required, I can take 1 more class. It is a Saturday or a Sunday, I can take one more class. I can inform if it is not complete, right? So if you have any question, did you understand what I taught? That is very important.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you understand?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, where can I get the recording?
Ma'am.
Ma'am,
Yes.
excuse me, ma'am. Where can I get the recording?
Recording of what?
The class is being recorded. Where can I find the recording,
No,
ma'am?
don't ask such administrative questions to me. I am not recording. I am just taking your class. How to get the recording? Who will give you the recording? That is a part of the office job. I don't know.
Okay, ma'am.
So whatever is relates to my subject, you can ask such questions to me.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
In the poem The Tiger,
Huh.
that fifth stanza,
Huh.
when the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears. That little confusing, not clear what is the idea.
Just let me see.
Fifth stanza. Hmm. Okay.
When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he, who made the lamb, make thee?
Yes.
He talks about God. He talks about God, that when the stars threw down the spears,
Yeah, that is the point. That is
when the
not
stars
clear.
when the stars threw down the spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Just a minute.
Ma'am, with respect to the same stanza which sir told now,
Hmm.
is he questioning the existence of God here?
No. He's not at all questioning the existence of God. He says, he's asking God, are you smiling that the one who has, you have created the lamb, you could create this? Are you smiling? Did you smile his work to say? This is the poet is full of wonder. He's not able to understand. He is confused how the God could create such a thing, and he brings analogies. Let me just find out what is the meaning. Just a minute. Are you having long questions from that? Have you seen the questions?
Yes, this was an RTC in one of the previous year questions. Yes.
Which it's coming.
RTC. Yes.
Okay, just a minute.
Reference to context. Yes.
Mhm. he means to say that when this when this tiger was created, where is the line? Yeah, when the tiger was created, these stars threw down, even the stars, the wonderful creation of God. They were also, they were as if they didn't, they were deadly terrorized by that, and as if they were also crying. They keep crying. The teardrops were coming, because how could God create such a fearsome animal? So that fearful creation has been, he says that even the stars, which has been created by God, they are also overtaken by grief and horror when they see this creation. So this is a question. It goes a series of questions, and he himself is confused. He himself is not clear why God, who has created such innocent beings, has also fashioned the tiger. Right? So that is a puzzling thing for the poet. So he says, when the stars threw down the spears and watered heaven with their tears. So even the stars, which are the creation of God, they are also, they threw down the spears, and they watered heaven. That means they are also becoming crying. They become sad to see that such a creation has been made by God. That is what he means to say. So everyone is surprised. It's full of awe how that tiger has been created by God, including the poet himself. Yes, view of good and evil. Yes, right. Then any other question?
Ma'am, I have a question. Ma'am, in reference to the same poem, when we explain about the poem, it should be written in the own English language, like the spelling should be Tyger, or
No. When you
the
refer
new,
to the poem, it should be Tyger only.
while explaining the.
Yeah, you cannot correct it.
Okay.
You cannot correct it. You write Tyger. I
Okay,
don't know
okay.
why he wrote Tyger. Maybe a rhythm. He wanted to bring a rhythm to his poem. So he says tiger. Ty is the stressed tiger. So perhaps he wanted to bring a stress to his poem, and but it's a beautiful poem. It's a lovely poem.
Okay, okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Ancient was also same. Who has Sunil Dhangar?
Good evening, ma'am.
Uh,
Ma'am, I realized a lot of time whenever I read the novels and poetry books of English language, that I'm facing the meaning issue.
yes. Then
I
look
can't,
how.
I can't manage the meaning in. Actually, my native language is Marathi, and I can't I can't understand the sentence, full sentence. So that time, how can I get the? How can I understand the meaning of the word? Some
First
words
thing,
are very difficult.
first thing, you should have a dictionary with you. Okay.
Okay.
That word meaning you can always get through the dictionary. You have to initially know the word meaning of the from the dictionary. But at times, the dictionary also doesn't help you, because if it is a concept by a poet or someone has written a thing, you have to totally understand it to get the meaning of it. Just one word will not help you, but at least some doubt of yours can be cleared. You can have a if you read the meaning of that, perhaps definitely you will get the you can understand the poem. But you have to go very slow, read the meaning of the poem, read the meaning of the words, and then go. As such, everyone faces this problem now, that everyone can understand a poem. Poets are difficult to be understood. It's not that easy. So it's not a very common question. Everyone has this problem. It's not only related to you. But have a dictionary, and if you're having any problem, see the meaning of that word, or else you can go to the Google and in that particular age you can find out what really happened, so you can get some additional information related to the poem from there. Anyone else?
Good evening, ma'am. Samriddhi here.
Hmm?
We talked about William Wordsworth Prelude, and you mentioned that he talks about the growth of a poet's mind in it.
Hmm?
So it's roughly around 7,800 you mentioned about the lines. So how to go about it, ma'am?
Hmm?
How to go about it? Are we supposed to have a summary of it, an idea
Yeah,
of
yeah, you cannot go about detail line by line. It is a 20 number question for you. So you have to analyze what he has said through that poem. What is the main objective of the poet? What does he wants to convey through that poem? How does it describe in that poem? Just maybe 2 or 3 important episodes from that poem you can relate.
Okay.
He has given the different phase of a man. No, for one is the child, then he's become youth, then he becomes an adult age. So these are the 3 different phases of life he has described in the poem. And not only physically he grows, how the mind also grows, right? From a physical level, how he becomes a very spiritual. At the end of the poem he becomes very spiritual, very sublime, and it is all due to the effect of nature on the mind of the poet.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so now I think we can wind up. It has become too heavy for me today to deal with such poems, because when you read teach a poem, and especially Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Blake, most of the poems I have dealt, and so you have I think you have a fair idea of the romantics by now, romantic age by now. So don't never use a casual word like say romantic. Never use that. As a student of literature, you have to be very conscious when you say it is romantic, right? So
Yes.
anything else? Because I'm giving you time for you to ask.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Hmm.
Excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am, when will you share notes of these topics?
You have listened to me. Why share notes?
Actually, ma'am, you said now.
I said so many things. You are only remembering one part of mine.
Okay.
That is note.
Okay.
Hmm? You're only remembering the note part of it, but the other part you have not said that we have understood. I have already given some notes, no? Whatever I have taught till now, I have already given the notes. You can find out from your friends. Okay? Nilam.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now we wind up, and it's good night to all of you. Okay?
Thank you, ma'am. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Good night.
Thank you, ma'am. Good night, ma'am.
Good night.
Do take care of your health, ma'am. Your throat seems to be strained.
Thank you, ma'am.